My name is Walter Doyle, and I am 71 years old. 2 weeks after I sold the hardware chain I built with my own two hands, my daughter looked me in the eye across a candlelit table and let her son save my life before she could take it. I didn't know that yet. Not that night. That night, I only knew I was happy, and happiness had become such an unfamiliar guest in my house that I barely recognized its knock. I built Doyle's Hardware from a single storefront on Fairview Avenue in Boise, Idaho, back when I was 26 years old and had exactly $400 and a truck that needed a new transmission. My father had told me hardware stores were dying even then, that big chains would swallow men like me whole. I didn't listen. I couldn't afford to. I had a young wife named Carol, a baby girl on the way, and a stubbornness that ran deeper than good sense. Carol believed in me before there was anything to believe in. She kept the books at our kitchen table by lamplight, balanced our checkbook down to the penny, and told every customer who walked through our door that her husband would fix whatever they'd broken, even the things that weren't hardware. She was right more often than I deserved. We grew slow. Then we grew steady. By the time our daughter Danielle turned 10, we had 3 stores. By the time she left for college, we had 11, spread across 2 states, and I had stopped counting the hours I worked because counting them would have broken my heart. I still remember the smell of that first store, sawdust and machine oil, and underneath it, something like hope. Carol started forgetting things 4 years ago. Small things at first, where she'd put her glasses, what day of the week it was. Then larger things. My name some mornings. The name of our daughter on the worst mornings. She lives now in a care facility 20 minutes from my house, in a room with a window that faces a garden she can no longer remember planting. The last thing she said to me that made complete sense before the fog closed in for good was this: "Don't let them make you small, Walter." I didn't ask her what she meant. I wish now that I had. Danielle married Mitchell Grant 9 years ago, in a backyard wedding I paid for because Danielle wanted white roses and Mitchell's family couldn't afford them. Mitchell was charming in the specific way that men are charming right before they ask you for something. Over the years, I learned to recognize the sound of his voice on the phone, warm and easy, right before the ask arrived. A restaurant that needed a second round of investment. A tech startup that was 18 months from profitable. Then 2 years ago, something called a crypto fund, which Mitchell explained to me twice, and which I understood exactly as little the second time as the first. I gave him money because Danielle asked me to, and because I have never once in 71 years figured out how to say no to my daughter's voice when it trembles. Somewhere in all of that giving, something between us went quiet. We still spoke. We still had dinners at Thanksgiving, still exchanged birthday cards with $20 bills folded inside for my grandson. But the warmth had thinned out, the way a rope thins before it finally gives. 3 months ago, a Dutch retail conglomerate made an offer for Doyle's Hardware that I had spent 40 years hoping someone would someday make. $46 million, after everything, after the lawyers, after the accountants, after 4 decades of sawdust and Saturday mornings. I signed the papers on a Tuesday. I sat alone in my lawyer's office afterward, holding a pen that had just ended the only working life I'd ever known, and I thought about Carol, and how badly I wanted to tell her, and how she wouldn't understand a word of it even if I did. 2 days later, Danielle called me. Her voice was different, softer. She said she'd been thinking about her mother all week, about the store, about how proud Carol would be if she could understand what I'd built. She said she was sorry we drifted. She asked if I would come to dinner, just the 3 of us, her, Mitchell, and my grandson Eli. A celebration, she said. No business talk, just family, the way it used to be. I should have asked why now. I should have wondered why tenderness had arrived exactly 2 days after $46 million did. Instead, I said yes before she'd even finished a sentence, because I am an old man with a wife who doesn't know my name anymore, and a daughter who almost never calls just to talk. And hope is a terrible thing to refuse when it's offered to a man like me. I hung up the phone and sat for a long moment in my kitchen, turning my old keyring over in my hand. There's a single brass key on it that hasn't opened anything in 30 years. The key to my very first store on Fairview Avenue, long since sold and turned into a nail salon. I've never taken it off the ring. I jingle it sometimes without noticing I'm doing it, Usually when I'm nervous about something I can't name. I was jingling it that night, standing in my kitchen, smiling like a fool at the thought of my daughter's voice going soft again. I told myself I was imagining the strangeness of the timing. I told myself grief and money do strange things to a family, and maybe this was simply what healing looked like, arriving 2 days late and dressed as a coincidence. I did not know that my son-in-law's crypto fund had collapsed 11 weeks earlier, or that he owed men who did not send polite reminders. I did not know that my daughter had spent 3 nights that week researching something she would later wish she'd never searched for at all. And I did not know that the boy I was most looking forward to seeing, my grandson, 9 years old, quiet as a held breath, already knew more about that Thursday dinner than I did. All I knew, standing in my kitchen with a key I hadn't needed in 30 years, was that my daughter wanted to see me, and that I would put on my good jacket and go. I put on my good jacket and went, because I am an old man with a wife who doesn't know my name anymore, and hope is a terrible thing to refuse when it's offered to a man like me. The restaurant was called Bellwether, tucked into a converted brick warehouse downtown, the kind of place with candles and glass jars, and a wine list longer than my patience for reading it. Danielle had chosen a private table near the back, half hidden behind a folding screen. I remember thinking, walking toward it, that it looked less like a celebration and more like a place you'd choose if you didn't want to be seen. Mitchell stood up first. He always did that. Stood up a half-second too fast, like he'd rehearsed it. Walter. He gripped my hand harder than the moment called for. Look at you. $46 million, and you still dress like your stocking shelves. He laughed at his own joke. I smiled because that's what you do. He'd ordered sparkling water. I noticed it the way you notice a dog that doesn't bark. Mitchell Grant had ordered bourbon at every meal I'd shared with him for 9 years, including 2 funerals and his own wedding rehearsal. Tonight, a glass of Pellegrino sat sweating at his elbow, untouched ice, a lemon wedge perched on the rim like a small, polite lie. Cutting back, he said when he caught me looking. New year, new me. It was September. Danielle kissed my cheek and held onto my arm a beat longer than usual. She was wearing her mother's old pearl earrings, the ones Carol used to save for church. She looked lovely and exhausted in equal measure, and every few minutes her hand drifted to a small compact mirror, sitting beside her fork, flipping it open, checking her reflection, snapping it shut, open, shut. I counted 4 times before the appetizers even arrived. My grandson Eli sat across from me, and something about him was wrong before he'd said a single word. Eli is 9, and Eli does not stop talking. He talks about dinosaurs and Minecraft, and a kid named Bryce who he alternately loves and despises, depending on the week. He talks with his mouth full and his hands moving, and no regard whatsoever for whether anyone is listening. That is who my grandson is. That is who he has always been. Tonight he sat very still, cutting his chicken into smaller and smaller pieces he had no intention of eating, glancing up at me every few seconds like he was checking that I was still there, still breathing, still fine. You feeling all right, buddy? I asked him. I'm okay, he said, too fast, the way you answer when you've been told what to say. I let it go. I told myself boys his age go through phases. I told myself grief does strange things to a family, and maybe Eli had simply picked up on the tension between his parents the way children always do, absorbing the weather of a room without understanding the storm. Mitchell raised his glass of sparkling water. To new beginnings, he said. Walter, you earned every dollar of that money. Every single one. There was something underneath the sentence I couldn't name yet. Not pride, not warmth. Something closer to hunger wearing a nice suit. To new beginnings, I said, and drank from my wine. Around 8:30, my phone lit up on the table. My estate attorney, confirming the final wire transfer, had cleared ahead of schedule. $46 million, fully in my name, fully mine, sitting in an account that 30 years ago I couldn't have imagined existing. Business, Mitchell said, with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. The rich never get a night off. Danielle laughed, a half-second too loud. Go ahead, Dad. We'll be right here. I stepped away from the table, out past the folding screen, into the narrow hallway that led toward the kitchen. My attorney talked me through the paperwork. I said the things you say. Thank you. Yes, I understand. Please send the confirmation to my email." When the call ended, I stood there a moment longer than necessary, jingling the old brass key on my ring, without noticing I was doing it. The way I always do when something in the back of my mind is trying to get my attention, and I won't let it in the front door. That was when I felt a small hand close around my sleeve. Eli had followed me out of the dining room. His face was pale, his eyes too bright, the particular brightness of a child trying very hard not to cry. "Grandpa," his voice came out small and cracked down the middle. "Don't drink that." I crouched down to his level, my knees complaining the way they always do now. "Don't drink what, buddy?" His hand was shaking against my arm. I could feel it through my jacket sleeve. A small tremor that told me more than his words had yet. "The wine." He glanced back toward the dining room, then back at me. His whole body coiled tight as a spring. "Mommy put something in it. I saw her. When you went to the bathroom before the food came, she had a little bag. She put it in your glass, and she stirred it with her spoon, and she looked scared, Grandpa. She looked really scared, and then she saw me watching, and she told me not to tell you, and I said okay, but I don't want you to drink it. Please don't drink it, please." The words tumbled out of him in a single unbroken breath, the way confessions do when a child has been carrying something too heavy for too long. I did not move. I did not speak. Somewhere behind that folding screen, my daughter was sitting at a table with a glass of wine she had already ruined, waiting for her father to come back and drink it. Somewhere behind that folding screen, my daughter was sitting at a table with a glass of wine she had already ruined, waiting for her father to come back and drink it. I knelt there in that hallway for what felt like a very long time, though it could only have been seconds. My grandson's hand was still fisted in my sleeve. 9 years old, and he was the only honest person at that table. "Okay," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "Okay, buddy, you did the right thing telling me." "Are you mad?" "Not at you. Never at you." I made him breathe with me, the way I used to when he was small and afraid of thunderstorms. In through the nose, out through the mouth, 4 counts each way. When his shoulders finally came down from around his ears, I told him to go back to the table and eat his chicken and act like nothing was wrong, because that was the safest place for him to be while I figured out what to do. I did not, in that hallway, know exactly what she'd put in my glass. I did not know yet about the crypto fund that had collapsed 11 weeks earlier, or the men Mitchell owed money to, or the particular cruelty of a plan built around a bottle of blood thinners meant to look, afterward, like an old man's heart had simply given out at dinner. All I knew was that my daughter had put something in my wine, and that meant I was no longer her father at that table. I was a problem she had decided to solve. I found our waiter near the kitchen door, a young man with a name tag that read Dominic, refilling a water pitcher with the particular boredom of someone counting down to the end of his shift. "I need a favor," I told him, low and fast. "In about 2 minutes, I need everyone at my table looking somewhere else. Doesn't matter how. Drop something. Ring the dessert cart bell. Whatever gets their eyes off that table for 5 seconds. He looked at me like I'd asked him to speak Latin. "Sir, I don't." $50, I said. "And you're not doing anything wrong. I promise you that." Something in my face must have told him this wasn't a game. He nodded, slow, and disappeared toward the dessert station. I walked back to the table with my hand steady and my heart doing something closer to a hummingbird's than an old man's. Danielle looked up and smiled at me, the same soft, hopeful smile she'd worn on the phone 2 nights earlier. "Everything okay, Dad?" "Everything's fine," I said. "Just business." I sat down. My wine glass sat exactly where I'd left it, dark red and patient. Danielle's water glass sat beside her fork, untouched, sweating faintly in the warm room. I did not know for certain, sitting there, that swapping them would matter. I only knew that if I was wrong about all of this, I would rather be wrong holding a glass of water than a glass of wine. The dessert cart bell rang, high and bright and completely unnecessary, followed by the crash of a tray hitting tile. Every head at our table turned. I moved my glass 6 inches to my left. I moved hers 6 inches to mine. It took less than 2 seconds, the kind of small motion a man learns doing inventory counts for 40 years. Quick hands, no wasted movement, no reason for anyone to notice a thing had changed. When the heads turned back, nothing looked different. My wine sat in front of Danielle now. Her water sat in front of me. Dominic apologized loudly for the dropped tray, and Mitchell rolled his eyes and made a comment about the service going downhill, and I reached into my pocket and closed my hand around the old brass key on my ring, the one that hadn't opened a door in 30 years, and held onto it like a man holding a railing on a boat in rough water. Danielle picked up the glass in front of her without looking at it. Why would she look at it? It was exactly where her wine had always sat. She drank. Not a sip. A long swallow. The kind of swallow a nervous person takes when they need their hands to be doing something other than shaking. I said nothing. I ate my lamb. I asked Mitchell a question about the crypto fund I already suspected was worthless, and I listened to him lie to me about numbers that didn't exist, and the whole time some small, sick part of me kept waiting to see who would pay for what my daughter had done. 10 minutes passed. Danielle laughed at something Mitchell said. Too loud. The way she'd been laughing all night. Then she pressed 2 fingers to her temple. I have the worst headache all of a sudden, she said. Mitchell didn't look up from his plate. You've been stressed all week. Another few minutes. She blinked hard, twice, like she was trying to clear something out of her eyes. She reached for her water, my old wine glass, now empty of everything but a faint red residue, and found nothing there to drink. Everything's blurry, she said, and there was the first real thread of fear in her voice. I watched my son-in-law's face very closely in that moment, because some instinct in me already understood I would need to remember exactly what I saw. And what I saw was not concern. It was calculation. His eyes flicked toward the exits, toward the kitchen, toward anywhere that wasn't his wife's face. Dad. Danielle's hand found mine across the table, and her fingers were cold. Something's wrong with my... She never finished the sentence. Her chair scraped back. Her compact mirror, the one she'd opened and closed all night like a nervous tell, slid off the table and hit the floor, and the little round glass inside it cracked clean across the middle. She just needs air, Mitchell said, standing too fast, his voice far too calm for a man whose wife was swaying on her feet. Let's get her outside. She'll be fine. He did not reach for his wife. He reached for her purse. And across the table, my grandson grabbed my hand instead of his mother's, gripping it so hard I could feel his pulse hammering against my palm, and I understood, in that single frozen second, that I was about to find out exactly how far a man would go to make an old man's death look like nothing more than bad luck. I was about to find out exactly how far a man would go to make an old man's death look like nothing more than bad luck. Paramedics reached Danielle in 11 minutes. A retired air nurse 2 tables over had already gotten her on her side, checking her breathing, refusing to let Mitchell just drive her ourselves. By the time the ambulance doors closed, I was the one climbing in beside my daughter. Mitchell was left standing on the curb, and something in his face wasn't fear for her. It was fear of what she might say if she woke up. She woke up 2 days later in a hospital bed, groggy from the anticoagulant reversal drugs the doctors had pumped into her the moment blood work came back. A detective named Rees was already waiting in the hallway when I arrived, holding a phone in an evidence bag. Mitchell had been arrested the night before, not for what he'd done to Danielle, for what he'd said, unprompted, to the first officer who separated him from the chaos. She wasn't even supposed to be the one drinking from his side of the table. He heard himself say it. I watched later, on the bodycam footage, the exact moment his face understood what his mouth had just done. The rest came fast, the way Rod always does once you finally pull back one board and find the whole foundation soft beneath it. Detective Ruiz called me from her cruiser 2 weeks later, not with a list, but with a single document, a forged loan application, my signature copied onto a home equity line Mitchell had opened against Danielle's childhood house, without her knowledge, to cover margin calls on a crypto fund that had collapsed 11 weeks before that dinner. He owed men in Reno who did not accept apologies as payment. The blood thinner had been his idea. Time to look, on paper, exactly like an old man's heart finally giving out. Mitchell pled guilty to attempted murder and financial fraud. 22 years, the judge said, and Mitchell did not turn around to look at any of us on his way out. Danielle is different now. Quieter. She started seeing a therapist twice a week, and some days she calls me just to talk. No timing to question. No envelope hidden underneath the tenderness. I put the 46 million into a trust. Not for her, not yet for Eli. Released to him in pieces as he grows, with a clause that lets Danielle draw from it too. But only as she rebuilds what trust actually looks like, one honest year at a time. Last Sunday, I sat Eli down at my kitchen table and pressed the old brass key into his palm, the one that hasn't opened a door in 30 years. This opened my very first store, I told him. It only ever worked for people who told the truth, even when it was hard. It's yours now. He held it like it weighed more than it did. Here is what that dinner taught me, in the end. Money didn't make Mitchell dangerous. It only gave his greed somewhere to point. The people who save us rarely look the way we expect. Sometimes they're 9 years old and shaking in a hallway. And trust was never something Danielle or Mitchell could inherit from me. It's a key. You earn it, one honest choice at a time, or you don't.